Hi there, girls, and welcome to lesson number 4 in this series for Year 9. Again, we're looking at the British sector of the Western Front. My name is Mr. James. I'll be your teacher today, even though that looks nothing like me. And your lesson title is, What types of injuries did soldiers suffer on the Western Front? Same as your other lessons, make sure you've got your history workbook in front of you. You're obviously going to need a pen. Scrap paper is useful, and obviously you want no distractions because this will help you learn things far more effectively. So no phones, no TV, just you, the PowerPoint and the work booklet. Pause now if you need to get yourself ready. We're going to start with activity 4.1, which is your knowledge recall quiz. Remember, we do these because we're trying to put things into your long-term memory. And last lesson, we looked at illnesses soldiers contracted during the First World War. You've got 5 questions, quick fire answers, and we'll see how you do in just a moment. So press pause and attempt the questions. Okay, Year 9, let's see how you did. So question 1 asked you this: what caused soldiers to contract trench fever? Your answer should have been lice, and if you're really good, you'll remember that they're known as greybacks to the British soldiers. Question 2 was, what did the Army code NYD.N mean? Again, that stands for not yet diagnosed, nervous. We now know it as shell shock. Question number 3 is, name one treatment that's used when soldiers contracted trench fever. You had 2 options here. You could have said about drugs, and again, to be really specific, you could talk about salvarsan and quinine, or you could also talk about passing electric currents through the affected area. Question number 4, name one prevention used to stop soldiers contracting trench foot. Well, you could have said this: rubber waders, whale oil being rubbed into the feet, being issued 3 pairs of socks. You could have said how men were put into pairs to inspect others' feet. You could have talked about how they provided coal braziers, which are like burners, to keep trenches warm in winter. And then number 5 is linked to this. Why were mechanical pumps sent to the trenches? And you should have said to prevent trenches from becoming waterlogged, the cause of trench foot. Now, in this lesson, we're still looking at the ways soldiers suffered on the Western Front. We're no longer looking at illnesses, though. We're now looking at injuries. So, in order to understand this, our first objective is you need to know the new types of weapons developed and used during the First World War. It's these weapons that are going to cause the injuries. Number 2, you need to understand the effects of 3 types of injury. You need to know about wounds, you need to know about infections, and you need to know about gas attacks. And then lastly, we're going to use some sources, 2 sources in particular, to practice our comparative and evaluative skills. At this point, get your knowledge organiser. We're going to highlight 2 or 3 things. So, firstly, go down to vocabulary. The first thing you need to do is you need to highlight number 1, artillery. You may have already done this, but to make sure, just do it now. Staying with vocabulary, we then need to highlight a couple of other things. So, if you go down to number 7, you need to highlight gas gangrene. Good. Skip down a couple more, and you need to highlight number 9, poison gas. Lastly, staying with vocabulary, highlight number 12, shrapnel. Because we're using sources, I'd also like you to highlight number 1 of sources of evidence, which is personal accounts. Good. Once you've done that, then we can move on. Your first activity on this topic of injuries on the Western Front, which is activity 4.2 in your booklet, is based on this part of your lesson resources. Have a look at this source. We've called it source C, and look at sources A and B. You've got two jobs, as you can see. Quickly, note down the provenance, by which you mean the nature, origin, and purpose of both sources A and B, and then study source C. Can you place the three types of gas used in gas attacks into order from the most frightening to the least? And then, if you can, in a sentence, explain why you chose that order. As a hint, please do remember that when we say nature, we mean the type of source. And when we say origin, we mean when it was made. Purpose means why it was written. Press pause and write your ideas down now. Okay, let's compare our answers for 4.2. So this is source A. Here's what you should have got down. In terms of nature, source A is a witness account. Its origin is in 1915. And its purpose is this. I believe here Lance Sergeant Elmer Cotton is writing this down in his notebook because he wants to describe a gas attack. And I imagine that he's writing it down because he wants to remember that past attack accurately, because his ultimate intention is to tell other people about the horrors of the war. Press pause at this point and write anything that you might have missed. Here's source B. For source B, you should have written something like this. Its nature is that it's a painting. In this case, produced by John Singer Sargent. But that comes in origin. So it's made, or painted I should say, in 1919 by that particular artist. In terms of its purpose, again, we're looking to record the effects of a gas attack. But at the same time, John Singer Sargent is producing this because he's been commissioned or asked to by the British War Memorials Committee. So in one sense, he's fulfilling his commission. It was work. But in another sense, he knows that his painting is going to be displayed for the public to see. Again, press pause and write anything that you might have missed. Lastly, here's source C again. Here's the order I came up with and my reasoning why. I think the most serious type of gas attack was a phosgene attack. I say that because its effects are similar to chlorine, but it acts much faster. In fact, it says there, it could kill an exposed person within 2 days. Second, I've put chlorine, as again, it could lead to death by suffocation, but remember, it didn't act as quickly as phosgene. And then lastly, although still serious, I'd put mustard gas as the least serious type of attack, because although it's odorless and works very quickly, it causes blisters rather than suffocation and death. Again, press pause and compare your answers to mine. Let's now introduce some new knowledge to you in regards to our topic, injuries on the Western Front. Last lesson, we looked at illnesses, and again, I told you that you needed to know about 3 that are listed there in yellow. In this lesson, as said at the beginning, you need to know about wounds, infections, and gas attacks. These are all injuries experienced on the Western Front. In order to do this, you need to know about the new types of weapons that were used during the First World War. Now, rifles in this case weren't new, but what was new was that they could rapidly fire. Rifles that were used during the First World War were built so they could have cartridge cases where multiple bullets could be inserted, and therefore they could be fired rapidly i.e. more faster, than rifles could before. At the same time, their bullets were designed to make sure they caused maximum damage. You can see a close-up of a bullet here. It's the silver bit. The gold or brass bit is actually the casing of the bullet. Inside that casing, you'd have a propellant and you'd have a primer, so that silver bullet would be ejected out of the barrel of the gun at great speed. And it was pointed so that it would enter the human body far easier, causing significant damage. Secondly, you need to know about machine guns. Rifles were good because they could fire accurately up to 500 meters, but they lacked the speed of this weapon. Machine guns could fire up to 500 rounds, which means individual bullets every minute. For soldiers crossing no man's land, therefore, they were easy pickings for machine gun operators, who could often inflict multiple gunshot wounds on several soldiers due to the fact that they could fire so rapidly. Thirdly, you also need to know about artillery. By artillery, we mean heavy guns. You can see a picture of two here. During the First World War, technology improved so that artillery could fire increasingly accurately from a great distance. So it was common for guns to be able to fire up to 12 miles away accurately. And these bombardments could often last weeks or months, where enemy trenches were targeted, often overnight, but often during the day as well, repeatedly for this time, because as we said, we're trying to wear the enemy down. It's a war of attrition. Lastly, we also need to know about shrapnel. Now, shrapnel is one of our key words on our knowledge organiser. When we say shrapnel, we mean fragments of metal in the casing of shells that would often travel at high speed over wide areas. These shells would explode, often in midair or on impact of the ground, but it wouldn't just be their explosion that caused damage. It would be shards of metal that would be shot out, shrapnel, that could often penetrate the skin and flesh of surrounding soldiers. It's estimated through studies that around 60% of these injuries were to the arms and to the legs. So not necessarily deadly at the time, but certainly inflicting damage so that soldier needed treated. Overall, though, it was actually found that bullets were responsible for about 39% of wounds. But 58% of wounds were actually caused by shrapnel and high exploding shells. So this, in fact, was far more dangerous for soldiers than the potential to be hit by a bullet. Now you've been given the context of some of the weapons that were developed during the First World War. Your job is this: complete activity 4.3, your main activity. Read the workbook and the resources for the lesson, and as you can see, you've got 6 tasks, A through to F. Take a moment now to pause the PowerPoint and complete these 6 tasks. Okay, well done Year 9. Let's go to activity 4.4. This is further research. The impact of the war was huge, individually and on nations. And one way of reacting to that or communicating that was through poetry. You can see here a copy of Wilfred Owen's famous poem Dulce et Decorum Est, written in 1917. That's a Latin phrase from the Roman poet Horace, and it translates as this: "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." Read and listen, if you can use the YouTube link, to Wilfred Owen's poem, and consider this question. Based on what you know, how accurate is Owen's portrayal of a gas attack during World War I? Well done, Year 9. That's the end of Lesson 4 for the British sector of the Western Front. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos for Year 9 and for other year groups. And we'll see you again for Lesson 5 soon.